Teachers at our feet.
Thank you very much for joining us at Canva HQ. This is the existing Canva HQ. There is going to be a new Canva HQ, but this is pretty cool, right? So massive thank you to Canva for hosting us, Jade and the team. Just give them a massive round of applause for Jade and the team for hosting us here. They've provided all the drinks and the food, and feel free, even when we're talking, just to move. Pete's got the bottle. No, that is sensible. That is what we are talking about.
How to spot a northern man.
He was drinking it out of the bottle earlier. Yeah. We also want to say a massive thank you to Clever, who have helped us put this event on tonight. So thank you. So the way it's going to work is we're going to do a little bit of an Edufuturist type presentation. It's not a presentation in the strictest sense of the word. We'll talk a little bit. And then what we want to do is we want to hear from you. We've gone old school because the future is paper and pen. Yeah, thanks. There was one little laugh. Okay, but the future. So we've got some paper and some pens, and we're going to ask for your thoughts on this. Then we've got a panel of people that are going to talk a little bit around some of the things that we've been discussing. And any of you who have been around the Edufuturist podcast for long enough will know that we've been talking around these ideas around trends for a little while, because we don't want to dictate and say this is the future of education. We're just saying these are the weak signals. These are what we think is on the horizon. And in 23-24, at our Uprising event last summer, we posted and we published our 23-24 trends booklet. And the 4 themes is what we want to talk about today. And we then want to hear what you have to say about in that space. Because we decided off the back of the last Uprising, some of you came on the Friday morning afterwards, that we wanted to think about how do we build an authentic community in education. There's lots of people doing it, and I get it. There's ambassadors for different tech tools, ambassadors in different areas. You're an FE group, you're in a T-level group, you're in a MAT group, there's communities, and they're all really good. But what we want to do is bring together people from across all the sectors to think about what could we do and how can we push the envelope for not just the future of education, but also we know the future's now, right? We aren't being cheesy. What do we do in that space? So the 4 themes that we're going to look at, you'll have seen them going past on the rolling slides as we came in. But the first one is about holistic education. It'd be stupid of us to not talk about this idea about supercharging humans in this AI era. We know that those 2 letters have become synonymous with everything in education. In fact, we'll walk around the halls of BETT tomorrow probably. And if you see a stand without it, take a picture of it, because it's going to be worth its weight in gold, because they are rare things, stands without the words AI. So we're not saying that AI is not a good thing, but we're asking the question about how do we make sure that education we supercharge humans in the age of AI. So we're going to talk about a few people. So one of the people that right the way back in episode 70 of the Edufuturists podcast, we heard and interviewed an incredible human being, Rob Hoban. Give us a show of hands if you've heard of Rob from Agora School. If you haven't heard of Rob Hoban, go back and listen to Edufuturist number 70. We'll get some more listens there. Subscribe, like and subscribe, share it. Okay. But he talked about this idea about phones. Look at that. That was back in 2021. Way before Jonathan Haidt had written a book saying that we need to beware of the anxious generation, understandably, right? But he talked about the use of phones. Holistic education, thinking about the whole person in the age of AI.
Just my bit. And just to say thank you as well, you are all guinea pigs. We're trying out some new mics as media partners for BETT. Thank you very much, everybody. We've stepped into that space. And this is the first time we've moved away from sitting at a desk, interviewing and chatting online, to a space like this and seeing whether these work. If they don't, Ben's just going to record it on his phone and just pretend we're just going to pretend we're really important at BETT and just put it in our pocket and just see how we get on. But yeah, for those who know me, I was in education for quite a long time, stepping officially back in a little bit from Monday next week into an independent training provider. But I remember in 2016, I talked about the need for human intelligence in this field, that actually in the evolution and the real revolution of AI, and for those people like EdTech and COVID and AI in November 2022, AI has existed in lots of different forms for a long, long time, but the need for human intelligence, and what I mean by that is that understanding, that compassion, that empathy, critical thinking, what America calls the 4 C's and has done for a long time, and the need for that, and how education has become a place often that has lost its definition. We had Valerie Hannon on the podcast talking about it, that if we were to all just sit down on a post-it note and write what our definition of education actually is, maybe that would be really, really varied across the tables and individually. So what you have to think about is, as AI is going to be able to replace every single one of you, I don't know if you saw the documentary Terminator. It's a wonderful documentary about how AI took over the world. It's not, I have to repeat, it's not a documentary. It was fictitious. And there is fear, but actually AI is really evolving and is developing. But the thing that we focus on in education is the coaching, the human element of it, and then we focus on developing young people to be well-rounded, to be able to have communication and conversations, to be able to critically analyse and critically think, and all of those things. Because if AI can do the rest, and we're only focusing on regurgitation of information, really we're going to be replaced pretty quick. A few nods. Anybody disagree with that? Wonderful. If you don't, write it down on a post-it note at the end. We interviewed Will Goldsmith. If you don't know Will, Will runs a independent school. He's the head teacher of Bedale. They were in the news. The media love a headline, and they said this school is getting rid of all GCSEs. Actually, what they were doing is, for a long period of time, is focusing on a variation of assessment and thinking about actually how they want to create a community, how they want to focus on developing the well-rounded individuals that you see and what they produce and what they develop within their organisation. And Will talks openly about bringing self to leadership so that students can recognise, and Will is an openly gay man. His husband is from Yorkshire, that's why I like him even more. But actually bringing his authentic self into education as a leader allows the people in his education community, his school, and the young people to be authentic in terms of themselves. And I think it's about being a member of a community within a school, because ultimately, and we'll talk about it later, there are a lot of schools that are developing really, really quickly. The fastest growing school is an online school. And if online schools are doing all of that stuff that schools are getting face to face, actually how can we focus on connectivity, collaboration, communication, like we are here? Great, you want to listen to us for a period of time, hopefully not getting too bored just quick. But the best part of these events is connecting, collaborating, learning from each other, and really that's how we feel that holistic education takes it.
So the challenge in there is there's people come from all sorts of areas here. There are people that have walked in here for the first time and didn't know anybody else in this room. Well, first of all, kudos in that space, to walk into a space full of people who know each other, or it feels like everybody knows each other, and to walk in is incredible. But what we've tried to do is we're building this Wolfpack, and the hashtag Wolfpack BETT25, so if you do tag us in on anything, use that hashtag. The whole conversation is about building a Wolfpack. For those of you who know, you know. But for those of you who are new to this, when we talk about the Wolfpack, we're talking about that Rudyard Kipling poem, The Lower the Jungle. And in it he says, the strength of the pack is the wolf, and the strength of the wolf is the pack. And the whole conversation here is it's not about individuals building a presence and a profile. It's about the community and about owning this together and building that together. And part of that is about building a culture that does that. I have been really fortunate in my day job to be able to go out and help people with digital policies and AI policies and EdTech policies and teaching and learning policies and assessment policies. And the policies are amazing. We need policies. But a lot of the time, that's where it starts in an organisation. Let's write a policy to do this. And then they go, okay, we'll use this policy to develop a strategy, and then we'll go from a strategy, and then we'll try and build a culture. And I know that people say that, yeah, but we know culture first. But the whole conversation here is that we believe, and the conversation has always been, is that culture has to come first. How do you build a culture that is innovative, a culture that is caring, a culture that is empathetic, a culture that is striving for the future, that is technologically driven? It starts with agreed norms and values. I used to teach sociology alongside my subject specialism of religious studies and philosophy. And in sociology, they talk about you build cultures around norms and values, shared behaviours. So what do we do to create a culture? So what are the hallmarks of that culture? And then we go into strategy. Now, he wasn't on the Edufuturists podcast, but Peter Drucker did say culture eats strategy for breakfast. And we know that actually strategy, it's not saying strategy isn't important, but we want to start here. How do you build a culture that allows for that? So building a community, a collaborative culture, a culture that celebrates each other. That's why we do the awards that we do. A culture that brings people in. If you're new to this, and we know there's some people, there's literally people that have flown in from countries all around the world and have come to this event not knowing anybody, like I said. We want a culture that expects you're in, you're part of this, it's a community. And if that doesn't happen, we as a community govern that. Now, I'm not going to mention anybody in political ideas around community guidelines and other things like that. You know where I'm going if you know where I'm going. But we govern that. If we want a community that is the community that we agree on, we govern that as a collaborative.
I think everybody's expecting this to be less serious. I feel like we really... I know we're in somebody else's organisation, but holy fuck, we haven't sworn yet, and apologies for swearing, but yeah, Ben's done really well because he wasn't the first to swear, but we normally do this in organisations that aren't as fancy as this, where you used to run down student digs.
To be fair, Dan and Ian did say, what is this place? This can't be an Edufuturists event because there isn't piss on the floor. Well, there might be, you just can't see it.
We really took it there, so let's scale it back to being sensible a little bit. And I read a book. For those people who know me, it's my only book that I've read since primary.
Biff, Chip and Kipper.
Yeah. But I think it was The Teaching and Learning Rainforest, which is quite a traditional book in terms of its education focus, by a guy called Tom Sherrington. But actually, the thing I took away from it in regards to when I was in education at the time was actually we need to start thinking about a rainforest in education in regards to students and learners and teachers and leaders across the whole education system, of how we need to stop cultivating the crop. We need to grow rainforest, where we see shoots of outstanding practice developing from the rainforest floor rather than cultivating farmers' fields. How many times do you hear in education often that if you go into any of our schools in our multi-academy trust, you will always see exactly the same delivery in exactly the same way. Brilliant, it has a concept and it has a place. I understand that in regards to standardisation to a certain point, but actually, for those people who love education and have walked around the corridors and gone into classrooms and been lucky enough to be in those spaces at any point, trying to define what an outstanding experience for a learner is really difficult to write down and verbalise, because ultimately, good teaching and learning and good education and just good learning in general happens where just really wonderful green shoots of outstanding practice just happen and you just didn't plan it. And I think culture is around facilitating, creating spaces, reducing the risk, supporting that, and stop cultivating crop. We are not farmers. We should be growing rainforests, in my opinion, in terms of the culture of education. That's my pitch for Education Secretary, everybody. So thanks for your vote.
We might need one soon. No, jokes.
Sam and Cynic, not been on the podcast just yet. He might be in the offing. Absolutely isn't, by the way. Never will be. Because he's too big time, like Dan now. Look at him.
But Dan came on. Did you notice? Dan came on. Came back. Big time Dan. In fact, we should have called that Edufuturists 277, Big Time Dan.
So just on, I think often in education we know the what and we know the how of things, but often within individual organisations and across the whole education system, do we know why? So if I was to ask you what the definition of education actually is and the purpose of it right now, do we know the why of education? Do we know what education's purpose is? Do we know why it exists? I'm not going to ask you that question, don't panic. Everybody's gone silent like, oh my God, I've got homework. He's going to get me up and get me round tables and doing activities that teachers hate. But I think we just need to start with why.
And many of you know one of our absolute heroes who sadly passed last year, David Price, wrote a book called The Power of Us. Because we actually know that the culture that we're talking about here is a culture of why and asking why. It's a culture that suggests that we're going to create and cultivate, not cultivate crop, we're going to create that rainforest start learning, but also we want to be a collaborative community. And David wrote this amazing book which talks about how we connect, act and innovate together. And he wrote another book before this which was called Open, which set the whole thing rolling for us. And David, we renamed our Edufuturists Outstanding Achievement Award in his honour because he was that guy for us. He was the person that helped us get us thinking a little bit differently. He supported us, he opened up doors for us. And in that space, we realised that when you have a platform, or however big that platform is, we have a moral responsibility to open the doors for other people. Our other friend of the podcast and friend of Steve and me, Sammy White, talks about that idea about speaking people's names in rooms that they're not in. Like who isn't in this room, whose name you need to speak today. That's the kind of culture that we want to build. The other thing is, and we talked about levelling up learning and talking about levelling up and thinking about learning being beyond just school, college, university, and what that looks like. And when we talk about education, we're not talking about the mainstream education. And for those people who are not in UK context and have no idea what Gove means, don't Google Michael Gove. Just accept that that person was not the kind of person that we want to help us level up. But we're thinking about lifelong learning. What does that look like, and a culture that creates that? And we interviewed Petra on episode 238. And Petra grew up in a cult, in a religious cult, and broke free away from that. But she said that this really stuck with me. A formal education of some sort is invaluable to set you up, but only if it teaches you to constantly assess and weigh up information so you can challenge and think for yourself. How much of our education is designed to help people get to the next stage and not really care about what their life is going to look like? Let's get them into work. Interestingly, how many times have we heard that phrase? Employers are telling us that the young people are coming out and they haven't got the skills required in the workplace. We know that that's true. But is that all we care about? That they can function in work? I don't know. Surely we care about that they can function in life and they can function in relationships and they can function in sport and health and leisure and whatever else that looks like. So work is only one part of life. And she talked about this, about how we should be teaching young people that. When I first started teaching, that phrase came up from Cramlington. I don't know if anybody is old enough to remember Cramlington Learning Village, and they were and Gab Claxton stuff. Ian's waving, other people, but they were talking about learning to learn and about thinking skills and about developing that. And it's really interesting that we're coming back around to those conversations.
We, on our podcast, have interviewed quite a bit of the leadership group of Synthesis for Education. But Anna reached out to us and we had her on the podcast a while ago now, probably about 18 months ago. I think it was September 2023. And ultimately Anna's whole reason why she left education was she felt that kids are in a game of school, that they play a role to just cope and be in that space when actually they want to be able to be free thinkers and everything else. And how many teachers, if we were to evaluate, was that workload and all of those reasons are a reason why often they leave the education sector. But actually, if it wasn't a retention issue of teachers and we allowed our young people to make a decision whether they came to school, what would the retention crisis of learners be, I suppose? And if you look at the growth in regards to those learners that are out of education compared to in education, pre-COVID, the stat was 1 million, and now it's, I believe, the latest stat of 1.8 million of learners that are not in formal education. So it is growing significantly. There are many reasons, and again, this is not a bash of teachers. We love teachers. I think it's the shackles of education, just to call that out. I think it's the problem of the systemic bit. And I think what we want to build and think about is where they can experience failure and just be themselves and give real life experience rather than get to GCSE and write a letter. I love writing letters, everybody, but just not for me.
It's interesting as well in that failure space to quote Stephen Bartlett. I didn't think I would do this, but Stephen Bartlett, the second best podcast in the UK after Edufuturists podcast, he talks about failure equals feedback, feedback equals knowledge, knowledge equals power. So that, and I know he's probably nicked that from 12 other people as well, but the idea that failure is part of the learning process, do we embrace that? I've got a 10-year-old and 14-year-old daughters, and if they get anything wrong, the world has ended. They can't deal with failure. So they're both swimmers, and when they don't PB, it's the end of the game. Or when they DQ, they're like, oh, the world has ended. No, like what are we doing learning from failure? If things don't go the way you want them to do, how do we learn from that? And she hasn't been on the podcast. Again, because the trends aren't just about what we've heard on the podcast. And Steve, I know that you are quite passionate about this idea about continual learning and about that disruption anxiety, and you talked about this quote, didn't you?
Yeah, I think it's that whole theory of actually, and somebody quite recently has written a book around infinite learning and all those kind of bits, so apparently really expensive copies are available, but I'm only joking. But yeah, there's it's a wonderful book, to be fair, just to call it out, great friend Dan. But ultimately, what we've talked about for a long period of time, and many people have, is around that learning as a whole concept isn't just education, it's not just the four walls of a building. And actually, if we were to take a straw poll and ask you to put your hands up, that continual learning might be outside of the formal education, that actually learning is an infinite game. And in education, often, if you put your hand up if you support education and not in education anymore. Wow, there's not that many. Put your hands up if you're in education. Put your hands up if you're in education then. Are you in education? Put your hands up if you came to thinking it was woodwork and you're in the wrong room. Not sure what's going on, but actually that's fine. But ultimately, I think when you look at education and you try and support education from the outside, I've been in and out, that often the conversation is, should we just try this? And it's, let's just get Ofsted out of the way. Just wait 2 years and then we can just move forward. And I think the problem is that we have it's like the 1980s Nike advert. I don't know if anybody remembers it. I was very, very young at that time, but there is no finish line. And I think in an infinite game of learning, that ultimately what we want to drive is continuous learning for everybody outside of a formal setting. And I think what we're doing is we're often, for some learners, disengaging them so that they lose passion. And again, this is not head teachers, this is not leaders, this is a systemic thing, just to classify that. Not educators, not head teachers, not leaders, systemic and driven in terms of a system that was created perfectly 200 years ago and it's not evolved. But what we need to get back to is that definition of learning, as I start to think about, is an infinite game and something that isn't ending when you come to 18 or college or university, that you're passionate about and you find your way. And
then you look at the growth and explosion of online alternatives and thinking about, and Steve's mentioned synthesis earlier, a winner of our innovative project last year with Collab, people that are doing pretty incredible things around education done differently. What does that look like? If these are growing, and some of these, when Steve was talking about the fastest growing school in the UK, it's on this list. And it isn't a bricks and mortar school. What does that mean for us in education, or those of us that are working on education? There's a whole host of schools that are doing different things. And we've got a little bit of a thought, and we're kind of, by saying it out here, you all know that we've thought of this first before anybody else writes a book about it. We think that the future of education is pick and mix. Everybody remember pick and mix from Woolworths? Some of you are old enough to remember that. If you're not old enough to remember that, then get out. You don't belong in this room. No, joking. Even the young people belong in here. But Woolworths used to have pick and mix suites, and we think the future of education is probably going to be a little bit of this and a little bit of that and a little bit of this, rather than just you go into that formal space and that's how you, what you're going to do for your 7 years of education. Now, the final theme is around, or trend, is around technology. It would be silly of us not to talk. We started with technology around AI and holistic education in the age of AI, but actually we know that technology, when we talk about this, it's not an end in itself. Many of you working at tech space know that technology is an enabler. It's about turbocharging education, not just digitising it. I had the privilege, and I am going to do it. I don't care. I won't swear. I didn't swear then. Did you just notice? I stopped myself. Did I? Yeah, well, I said that's not swearing, is it? But I was speaking at a conference up in the north this last week, and I was on a panel with 2 assessment organisations who will not get named, but the 2 biggest ones in the UK. One of them's got 3 letters, and one of them sounds like Mason. Now, those 2 organisations were sat and we were talking about what do we think the future of education is going to look like. And I'm like, this is amazing, like great. And I got to talk about quizzes, because I was representing John on the team up there, and we're doing some cool stuff around that, but innovation. And somebody asked us, can you just give us a snapshot of what you think, what you hope education is going to do in the next 10 years? And I said, I really hope that education is personalised and we think about everybody's needs and we think about agency and student agency. And I was quite happy with that. The 2 people who followed after me from these awarding organisations said, digital exams. I shit you not. That is what their hope was digital exams. So, Sugata Mitra, we've had him on a podcast and he spoke at our event, and wonderful human being, like just incredible thinker. He talked about education not being, the system isn't broken. It's very trendy. But Sugata Mitra said, you can't solve new problems with old solutions. Okay, we're thinking about, it's very trendy to say that the education system's broken. It isn't. It's perfectly fit, but we just don't need it anymore, is what he said. Steve?
We need a revolution. We need education. If anybody knows this wonderful individual by his picture, this is Donald Clark. He's a provocateur, even more so than me. And I think Donald has done an awful amount of work positively around AI for decades. He's a disruptor. He's a polarising figure, but when we had for many. But ultimately, I think he talks about that we need to think about the way that we structure days, that we think about learning experiences, that we think about the personal experience that we can now develop using AI, and actually the ability to think beyond a one-size-fits-all model, because often, and we mention it, one-size-fits-all is one size that fits none, and ultimately it has been really difficult in a time-poor job for teachers to really innovate. So how do we actually move forward, and how do we generate and evolve and move the practice to starting to think about it?
So when we're saying this, the future of education is pick and mix, we're thinking it sits around some of these key ideas. Somebody said to me, that sounds a little bit like agency, if you pull them things together. A learning system that is personalised, that isn't just personalised, I can do what I want to do, because personalised literally means, and at the bottom of it, it's collaborative, because it's about your space in education, but it's in the world, but it's also your place in the world. So it's about how you fit. It's not about, I'm going to be my authentic self, and that's going to put 2 fingers up to everybody else, and that means I can do what I want, because it's personalised. No, it's caveated by collaborative. And then also this idea about let young people explore, let learners explore. Let's think about on demand. Why do we do 9 till 3? Is it because Realistically, it was built in a Victorian system where we needed to keep children at school so that parents could go to work. Who knows? Maybe. Shaping the next generation.